Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with Ask Dave. A reader writes, a viewer actually, readers, people don't read anymore, sorry. No, a viewer, two viewers write, and one of them agreed with the other one. Dear Mr. Hurwitz, I listen to a lot of classical music. I have a lot of CDs and different recordings of the same music. But I must say, I don't know how one can hear the differences among all these CDs. Sure, I hear fast and slow, louder and loud, I guess louder and softer, loud and loud, whatever. But what makes you say, for example, the performance is boring, the orchestra is good, but the conductor is bad, etc.? How do I hear those things? Oh, that's the nub of it, isn't it? It's a very good question, and someone agrees with that. In other words, you want to know how to be a critic, huh? Well, actually, it's all about experience. It really is. If you hear the differences between performances in terms of their broader characteristics, speed, volume, things like that, then you're hearing what the performers are doing. If you want to know whether what the performers are doing is good or bad, well, that takes a little bit of extra effort. And I can make some suggestions. I can sort of let you know how I eventually came to do that and some of the criteria that we look at. Some of them are objective, and you either know them or you don't, or you learn them. Others are subjective, and you can, you have to sort of know which are which. You have to distinguish between the two. What are the objective criteria? This is the easy part, actually. Quality of playing, technical quality of something, is simply a function of knowing what great playing sounds like. You have to be able to have experience listening to numerous performances. One of the best ways to get a handle on that, actually, is to find a performance that you really like. It doesn't have to be like the best. Just find one that you really like and know it. Know it by heart. You have to know every single note of it. It's got to be in your head so that that's the basis by which you can make comparisons, because it's all a game of comparisons. The essence of criticism, the essence of knowing what's good and what's bad, is being able to compare one thing to another thing. And in order to do that, you've got to start. You've got to have a starting point. So find the performance you really like, one that really, really does it for you. And then you can start comparing that to other versions. Now, you will hear what you said you heard, louder, softer, slower, faster, differences between those performances. But when it comes to technique, depending on what you're listening to, if it's a pianist, then it's piano technique. If you know how to play the piano or you've studied some instrument, then you'll have a sense of it. If it's a string quartet, if it's an instrumental piece, it's about ensemble values. Do they play together? Are all of the accents where they're supposed to be? Do they maintain a certain consistency of shape for melodies over long periods of time? You'll be able to get a feeling for that. But you've got to start with something that you really, really know well. Because after that, you can start to say, well, okay. Then you get another one and you hear the other one. And do you like it better than the one that you know well? Or do you like it less than the one that you know well? This actually presupposes that you have an open enough mind not to simply say, okay, this is the one I imprinted on. Nothing else sounds as good to me, therefore I don't care. Obviously, if you ask the question, you did care. So you're willing to accept that the one that you've really gotten to know may not be the best one. But how do you know that if you're not as familiar with the other ones? Well, one way to find out is the score. I always hesitate to recommend people look at scores because sometimes it's helpful and sometimes it isn't. But you do want to know, what did the composer intend? That's the other element in the equation. You can see what that performance does versus what the composer actually asked them to do. And on that basis, you can start to determine whether they did what was right or whether they did what was wrong. Now, we have many caveats there too, because the composer doesn't always know best. They don't always know what's going to make their music sound best, and they don't always know what another performance can bring to the equation, how much they wrote into the piece, and that allows for interpretation and many other views of it, some of which may be enormously compelling, directly contrary to what the composer wrote. But by and large, that's getting at it, things it's sort of another level. By and large, if you look at the way that the composer wrote the music and compare that to what these people did, and then you compare that to another version of what these people did, you could start to get a sense of who did more of what the composer intended, or who did it better, or whose view of fast is a better view of fast compared to the fact that, well, a little bit later, the composer says slow down or speed up. Do they allow room for that, even though they're doing fast? All of these things require experience, knowledge, curiosity, and an open mind, a really, really open mind, because, again, you have to be willing to accept that the thing that that may have made you fall in love, that you have a special feeling for, may be bad, or maybe not as good as something else. That was one of the things that fascinated me about getting into criticism. It was the fact that I could listen to a piece of music, and then I would hear the same thing done by somebody else, and it wasn't the same. And I wanted to know, what did the composer really, really want? And so that took a bit of work. Another way that you can get to that is by reading reviews. Find a critic, find somebody whose opinion you trust, and then let them guide you in forming your own taste. Because we're always learning. And it's not a question of, by the way, having one guru, one person who's going to tell you what's good and what's bad. It isn't. It's an ongoing dialogue. Tastes are always changing. Our feelings and opinions are always changing. I learn a tremendous amount from all of you. I talk to my fellow critics. Nobody is an island. One way you can tell that a critic is full of crap is if they haven't spoken to anybody else, and if they've never had a conversation about what a good performance is of a particular work. We can always find out wonderful, wonderful nuggets of information and new and fresh perspectives by listening to each other. But having done that, someone out there has to process all this information, digest it, and spit it out in the form of a useful recommendation, especially when you're talking about a work that's been recorded 25,000 times, and there's a zillion of them out there, and nobody can possibly have heard everything, and you've got to reduce it to information that viewers like you can actually use. That's what I try to do. I'm like this giant garbage disposal for information, and it just gets fed in, and I hopefully recycle it and put it out in useful form. That's essentially what critics do. Critics who review live performances are completely useless. They're just giving opinions of things that no one can see and are never going to happen again, so they don't make any difference. That's always been my view of it anyway. But for recordings, for objects that we can all share, one of the most important things that you want to look at is when you see a description of a recording by someone else, does it touch the points that matter to you about the particular work that you've tried to get familiar with, that you've listened to over and over again, that you know by heart, that you've internalized, that, when you've done that, you have parts that really matter to you, things about it that matter to you, obvious landmarks that strike you. So does the person talk about those in a way that's meaningful to you? That's one way to get at whether or not you will agree with somebody that a performance is good or bad. So there's that aspect of it. And next, there's the question of, does the person who's talking about the work talk about audible facts? If the trumpet is flat, if the ensemble's not together, if something is not as loud as it should be or not as soft as it should be, do you hear those things too? Are you in sympathy with what they're saying? I mean, I remember vividly, this was really an extraordinary experience for me. I was doing a series of live music appreciation internet chats, and they were. It was really at the beginning, the dawn of the internet era, and I would assign pieces of music for people to listen to. They actually purchased a suite of compact discs, various works, and we would go through them. And so everybody was listening to the same thing. And I had to try and describe particular elements in the performance. And one of the elements, at one point I said, well, listen to where the triangle comes in here, because I figured, gee, everyone's going to get that. It's a triangle. It's going ting like that. You can't miss it, right? Well, someone missed it. And they said to me, what triangle? And I said, well, it's 2 minutes and 23 seconds into this movement. I was as specific as I could be in identifying the spot. And they said, I don't hear it. I don't know whether they were being serious or whether there was something going on with their hearing or they were just trying to be cantankerous. I don't know. But it was unbelievably frustrating because they kept insisting that they didn't hear what I was describing, which was plain as day to me. It's supposed to be pretty obvious. But I did learn from this exercise, from that and other examples, people have very, very different perceptions of the same piece of music, extraordinarily different perceptions. And it's very difficult sometimes for everyone to come together and say, aha, I hear that, I hear that. So what someone who will teach you how to listen to this kind of music and how to make your own decisions is going to be someone who shares your hearing of these pieces, so that at least you can have the conversation. It doesn't do any good for people to say, oh, the orchestra just plays fabulously here, if you can't hear that. You have to say, how do they play fabulously? Are the brass just amazing? Do the woodwinds really screech? Do you hear, is there transparency of texture? Do you hear this particular line? Do you hear that particular voice? All of those things are qualities that will tell you, A, what you should be listening for, and B, whether or not you're hearing the same thing that the person describing the music is hearing. It's a process. It's a process that takes a great deal of time, and that's unbelievably fun, I think. I mean, it's fascinating. It's ceaselessly interesting, and a constant source of pleasure and amazement. And maybe I'll try and put together a little series of, good performance, bad performance things or comparisons you can make. The problem is that I can't guarantee that you're going to have the same recordings I'm talking about, the same performances, that we're all operating from the same basis. I mean, you never could back in the day, but at least back then, like 20, 30 years ago, there was a limited enough discography in most works that people had basis for comparison. A lot of people would have the same recordings, and so they'd know what we're talking about. Or there were some kinds of consensus. Remember where I did a whole series of consensus recordings, reference recordings of things that reflected a larger consensus among music lovers about what the great recordings were. That might be an interesting place to start, because those are all great recordings. They're all recordings about which there was an opinion that this was a standard. And once you have a standard, as I said, you can make your own comparisons, and you can learn what the elements of that standard are. It's an adventure, and one that I appreciate very much the fact that you're interested in taking, and I'm honored to be your guide to that adventure, to the extent that we're simpatico and you find my opinions helpful and these videos helpful. But that's what it is. It's all experience based on certain knowledge, and the basic element of that knowledge is your knowledge of the music that you love best, combined with an openness to understanding the different approaches to that music, and then ultimately your acquisition of some experience with who is best realizing those different approaches. I know that this is not going to be the most satisfying answer in the world, but it's the best that I can give in abstract, without being able to actually sit down with you and play you records and say, okay, listen to this, listen to that. I wish I could. I try to. That's what every review is in a sense, isn't it? We go through a performance and we say, well, this moment is good, this moment is great, that one's lousy, this one doesn't do what it's supposed to, this one, the composer said this, they do that. All of those things are in these videos. They're in reviews. They're what critics say and what critics do. And so when you find the ones whose opinions have worked for you, then you'll be able to educate yourself and start to draw your own conclusions, either in agreement with what a supposed expert says or in disagreement with what they say. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you develop your own set of critical faculties. There is also a series of videos I did, by the way, called Tips on Critical Listening. There are about 13 of them so far that talk about different elements of music and how you should listen for them and how you can listen for them. And they have musical examples, some of them, and whatnot. Those might be helpful as well. There's all kinds of tools that I provided, I've sprinkled throughout this channel, that you can actually try to experiment with and play with to see how you fall on the spectrum of critical listeners, and you just keep it up and ask me questions, and I'll be happy to try and answer them to the best of my ability. The Tips on Critical Listening playlist link is below this video in case you want to explore those things a little bit. They talk about different musical aspects, why they're important, and then how you can apply them to your own listening experiences. So I hope this helps answer the question. I know it's all over the place, and it's not a simple answer because it's not a simple question, but it's a profound question, and I thank you for asking it. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me, and take care.